David Rodriguez had everything figured out. At 32, he owned a successful construction company in his hometown of Cedar Falls. His trucks were always clean, his workers respected him, and his bank account was healthy. But what made him proudest was the woman who had agreed to marry him. Isabella Martinez was the kind of woman every mother hoped her son would bring home. She taught third grade at the local elementary school, volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, and made the best apple pie in 3 counties. When she laughed, which was often, her whole face lit up like sunshine breaking through clouds. Their story began like something from a movie. David had gone to the school to give a presentation about construction safety to Isabella's class. The moment he walked into her classroom and saw her helping a shy student with his math problems, something shifted in his chest. She wore a yellow dress that day, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. When she looked up and smiled at him, David forgot everything he was supposed to say about hard hats and safety cones. After his fumbling presentation, Isabella had walked him to his truck. They talked about her students, his work, and discovered they both loved old movies and hiking trails. Before he knew it, an hour had passed, and David found himself asking if she'd like to get coffee sometime. That coffee date turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks around the lake. Long walks turned into weekend trips to nearby towns, exploring antique shops and trying new restaurants. Within 6 months, David knew he wanted to spend his life with this woman. The proposal happened on a crisp October evening at Miller's Point, overlooking the valley where they both grew up. David had practiced his speech for weeks, but when the moment came, all his careful words disappeared. Instead, he simply dropped to one knee and said, "Isabella, I can't imagine my tomorrow without you in it." She said yes before he could even finish asking the question. Both families celebrated like they'd won the lottery. David's mother, Maria, had been worried her son would never settle down. She'd watched him work himself into the ground building his business, rarely dating, always claiming he was too busy for love. Isabella changed all that. Suddenly, David was leaving work early to take Isabella to dinner or help her set up her classroom for the new school year. Isabella's parents, Roberto and Carmen, had known David since he was a boy. His father had worked construction jobs with Roberto when they were younger. The families attended the same church, shopped at the same grocery store, and their kids had gone to school together. When Isabella brought David home for Sunday dinner, Carmen whispered to her husband that she'd been hoping for this match for years. The engagement party filled the community center. Half the town showed up to congratulate the couple. Old Mrs. Peterson, who had taught both David and Isabella in Sunday school, declared it was about time these two figured out what everyone else had known for months. Even Father Miguel, who married Isabella's parents 30 years earlier, said he'd be honored to perform their wedding ceremony. Planning the wedding became a family affair. Isabella's younger sister, Sophia, took charge of organizing everything. At 24, Sophia worked as a nurse at the county hospital and had a gift for keeping everyone calm, even in chaotic situations. She made lists, scheduled appointments, and somehow managed to keep both mothers from arguing about flower arrangements. Isabella seemed happy during those early months of planning. She and Sophia would spend hours looking through wedding magazines, debating between roses and lilies, discussing whether the reception should have a band or a DJ. Isabella talked excitedly about their honeymoon plans and the little house David was renovating for them on Maple Street. But as spring turned to summer, something changed. David first noticed it during a cake tasting at the local bakery. Isabella sat quietly while he and Sophia discussed frosting flavors, staring out the window with a distant expression. When he asked if she was okay, she smiled quickly and said she was just tired from work. The tired excuses became more frequent. Isabella started declining invitations to hang out with their friends. She stopped talking about wedding details with the same enthusiasm. When David suggested they register for gifts, she kept putting it off, claiming she didn't know what they needed. David tried to convince himself it was normal pre-wedding stress. His sister had gone through something similar before her wedding, crying about everything from the dress not fitting right to worrying about their mother's feelings about the seating chart. Isabella was probably just overwhelmed by all the decisions and expectations. Sophia noticed the changes too. She watched her sister pick at her food during family dinners, saw how Isabella's smile seemed forced when people asked about wedding plans, But whenever Sophia tried to talk to Isabella privately, her older sister brushed off her concerns with the same tired explanations. The breaking point came 3 weeks before the wedding. David had surprised Isabella with tickets to a concert featuring her favorite singer. Instead of excitement, Isabella burst into tears. She couldn't explain why she was crying, just kept saying she was sorry and that everything was fine. That night, David called his best friend Tony for advice. Tony had been married for 5 years and always seemed to have his life together. But even Tony didn't know what to say when David described Isabella's behavior. Maybe she's just scared, Tony suggested. Marriage is a big step. Even when you know it's right, it can feel overwhelming. David wanted to believe that was all it was. He loved Isabella more than he'd ever loved anyone. She was kind, intelligent, beautiful, and everything he'd ever wanted in a partner. Their families loved them together. They had similar values, enjoyed each other's company, and never had serious arguments. On paper, they were perfect for each other. But love wasn't lived on paper. It was lived in quiet moments in the space between words, in the look that passed between two people when they thought no one was watching. And lately, David had started to worry that when Isabella looked at him, she wasn't seeing the man she wanted to spend forever with. The wedding invitations had been sent. The flowers were ordered. Isabella's dress hung in her childhood bedroom, still in its protective bag. 200 guests were planning to attend. The church was booked, the photographer hired, and the caterer had already been paid half her fee. Everything was ready for the perfect wedding. David just hoped his bride was ready too. The rehearsal dinner at Romano's restaurant was everything a family celebration should be. The warm lighting cast a golden glow over the long tables where both families sat together, sharing stories and laughter. David's Uncle Frank told embarrassing stories about David's childhood, while Isabella's grandmother shared the secret family recipe for her famous tamales that she planned to teach Isabella after the honeymoon. Isabella sat between her mother and Sophia, wearing a simple navy dress that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. To everyone watching, she looked like the perfect bride-to-be. She smiled at the right moments, laughed at Uncle Frank's jokes, and graciously accepted congratulations from family friends who had driven in from neighboring towns. But Sophia knew her sister better than anyone else in the world. She noticed how Isabella's fork barely touched her food, how her fingers trembled slightly when she reached for her water glass, and how her smile never quite reached her eyes. Throughout the evening, Sophia caught Isabella staring off into space, as if her mind was somewhere far away from the celebration happening around her. When David stood to make a toast, Isabella's face went pale. He spoke beautifully about finding his best friend and soulmate, about building a life together, about growing old and watching their grandchildren play in the same backyard where they planned to raise their own kids. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. But Sophia noticed that Isabella barely sipped her wine. After dinner, as families lingered over coffee and dessert, Sophia found Isabella outside on the restaurant's small patio. Her sister was staring up at the stars, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm summer evening. "The party's inside," Sophia said gently, settling into the chair beside her sister. Isabella didn't look at her. "I needed some air." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and conversation from inside. Finally, Sophia spoke again. "Remember when we were kids and you used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms?" Isabella smiled for the first time all evening. A real smile this time. "You always made room for me even though your bed was tiny. You told me once that everything felt less scary when we faced it together," Sophia continued. "Maybe that's still true." Isabella's smile faded. She looked down at her hands, twisting the engagement ring that had belonged to David's grandmother. The diamond caught the light from the restaurant windows, sending tiny rainbows across her fingers. "Sophia, what if I'm making a terrible mistake?" The question hung in the air between them like a fragile thing. Sophia felt her heart skip a beat, but she kept her voice calm and steady. "What kind of mistake?" "David is a good man. The best man I've ever known. He's kind and hardworking, and he loves me so much it sometimes takes my breath away." Isabella's voice was barely above a whisper. "Our families are over the moon about this wedding. Everyone keeps talking about how perfect we are together. But what if perfect on paper isn't enough? What if I'm marrying him because it's what everyone expects, not because it's what my heart wants?" Sophia felt a complex mix of emotions wash over her. She had always admired David from a distance, appreciating his quiet strength and genuine kindness. But he was her sister's fiancé, and Sophia had never allowed herself to think of him as anything else. "Have you talked to David about how you're feeling?" Isabella shook her head. "How can I? Tomorrow is our wedding day. 200 people are coming. The church is decorated, the flowers are arranged, and Mom has been cooking for 3 days straight. How can I tell him that I'm not sure I'm in love with him the way a wife should be?" "Bella," Sophia said, using the childhood nickname only she was allowed to use. "A wedding is just one day. A marriage is the rest of your life. If you're having doubts this serious, maybe you need to listen to them." Isabella finally looked at her sister, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But what about everyone else? What about David?"
"He doesn't deserve to be humiliated."
"He doesn't deserve to have his heart broken because I couldn't figure out my feelings before now. And you don't deserve to spend your life feeling trapped in a marriage that doesn't feel right," Sophia replied firmly. "David wouldn't want that either. He loves you enough to want you to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include him." They talked until nearly midnight, sitting on that little patio while the restaurant cleaned up around them. Isabella confided fears she'd been carrying for months. She talked about feeling like she was living someone else's life, following a script that had been written for her rather than choosing her own path. Sophia listened without judgment, offering comfort and perspective when Isabella needed it. She helped her sister work through her tangled emotions, asking gentle questions that helped Isabella understand her own heart more clearly. As they finally prepared to leave, Isabella grabbed Sophia's hand. "Promise me something," Isabella said urgently. "Anything. If something happens to me, if I can't be here for some reason, promise me you'll take care of David. He's going to need someone who understands him, someone who can help him heal. Promise me you'll make sure he knows he's worthy of love, even if I can't be the one to give it to him." Sophia frowned, confused by the strange request. "Bella, what are you talking about? You're going to be fine. We'll figure this out together." But Isabella just squeezed her hand tighter. "Promise me, Sophia, please." Something in her sister's voice made Sophia nod. "I promise. But Isabella, whatever you're thinking, we can work through it. You don't have to face this alone." When they returned to the Martinez family home, the house was quiet. Isabella's wedding dress hung in her childhood bedroom like a beautiful ghost, the veil draped carefully over the chair where she used to sit and do homework. Her wedding shoes sat neatly beside the dresser, still in their box. Sophia helped Isabella take down her hair, brushing it the way she had when they were children. In the mirror, Sophia could see the scared little girl who used to crawl into her bed during storms, hiding behind the confident woman everyone expected to become a wife in less than 12 hours. "Whatever you decide tomorrow," Sophia whispered as she braided Isabella's hair, "I'll support you." That's what sisters do. Isabella squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "I love you, Sophia. Don't ever forget that. No matter what happens." As Sophia kissed her sister goodnight and walked to her own room, she couldn't shake the feeling that Isabella was saying goodbye to more than just her single life. Something in her sister's voice and the way she held herself suggested that this conversation was about more than pre-wedding nerves. But Sophia pushed the worry aside, telling herself that everything would look clearer in the morning. Weddings were stressful, and Isabella was probably just overwhelmed by the magnitude of the commitment she was about to make. She had no way of knowing that when the sun rose, Isabella would be gone. Isabella Martinez had never been the type of person to run away from her problems. Throughout her life, she had faced every challenge head-on, from difficult students in her classroom to family conflicts that needed mediation. But at 4:30 in the morning on what was supposed to be her wedding day, she found herself carefully packing a small suitcase in the darkness of her childhood bedroom. Her hands shook as she folded a few simple clothes and placed them in the bag. She left behind the expensive honeymoon outfits, the new lingerie her friends had given her at the bridal shower, and all the beautiful things that belonged to the life she was supposed to start in 10 hours. Instead, she packed practical items, jeans, comfortable shoes, a warm sweater, and the pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. The wedding dress hung silently in the corner, a white monument to expectations and dreams that felt like they belonged to someone else. Isabella couldn't bear to look at it directly. She had tried it on one last time 3 days ago, standing in front of the full-length mirror while her mother fussed with the hem and talked excitedly about the grandchildren she hoped would come soon. Looking at herself in that dress, Isabella had felt like she was wearing a costume for a play she didn't want to perform in. She left a letter on her pillow, written and rewritten a dozen times over the past week. Her handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. To my family and to David, I am so sorry. I know this will hurt all of you, and I hate myself for causing this pain. But I can't marry David today, not because he isn't wonderful. He is everything good and kind and deserving of love. But I can't give him the love he deserves, and he shouldn't have to settle for someone who isn't completely, wholeheartedly in love with him. I need time to figure out who I am and what I really want from life. I've been living the life everyone expected me to live, but I've lost myself somewhere along the way. I need to find that person again before I can promise my life to anyone else. Please don't look for me. I need to do this alone. I will contact you when I'm ready, when I've figured out how to be the person I was meant to be. Tell David that he deserves someone who will love him with her whole heart. Tell him this has nothing to do with his worth and everything to do with my own confusion. I love you all, which is why I have to do this. Isabella. The hardest part was walking past Sophia's room. Her sister's door was slightly open and Isabella could hear her peaceful breathing. Sophia had always been the strong one, the one who took care of everyone else. Isabella knew that Sophia would be the one to hold the family together after she left, the one to help David through the devastation that was coming. Part of Isabella wanted to wake Sophia, to tell her sister goodbye properly. But she knew that Sophia would try to talk her out of leaving, would offer to help her work through her doubts, would remind her of all the people who would be hurt by her decision. And Isabella was afraid that Sophia's logic and love might convince her to stay and go through with a marriage that felt wrong in her bones. She slipped out through the kitchen door, the same door she'd used to sneak out as a teenager when she wanted to meet friends at the lake. But this time she wasn't planning to sneak back in before her parents woke up. The bus station was nearly empty at 5 in the morning. Isabella bought a ticket to Portland, Oregon, a city she'd visited once during college for a summer art program. She remembered feeling free and inspired there, surrounded by creativity and possibility. It seemed like the right place to go when you needed to rediscover yourself. As the bus pulled away from Cedar Falls, Isabella pressed her face to the window and watched her hometown disappear in the early morning light. She saw the church where she was supposed to get married in 9 hours, the school where she taught 3rd grade, and the construction company where David was probably already awake. Excited about his wedding day, the guilt was crushing. She knew that in 2 hours, David would arrive at her family's house to find chaos instead of celebration. She knew her mother would be devastated, her father confused and angry. Sophia would blame herself, wondering if there was something she could have done to prevent this. But beneath the guilt was something else. Relief. For the first time in months, Isabella felt like she could breathe deeply. The tight feeling in her chest, the constant anxiety that had been her companion for weeks, was finally starting to ease. Meanwhile, back in Cedar Falls, David Rodriguez was whistling as he got ready for his wedding. He'd been awake since 4 o'clock, too excited to sleep. He showered, shaved carefully, and put on his best shirt before heading to the Martinez house to help with any last-minute preparations. David had always been the kind of man who took care of the people he loved. If Isabella's family needed extra chairs moved or decorations hung, he wanted to be there to help. It was his wedding day too, but he knew the bride's family usually had more to handle on the morning of the ceremony. He knocked on the Martinez family's front door at 7 o'clock sharp, carrying coffee and pastries from Isabella's favorite bakery. Carmen Martinez opened the door in her bathrobe, her hair still in curlers, but her face wasn't showing the happy excitement David expected to see. Instead, she looked like someone had died. "Mrs. Martinez, is everything okay?" Carmen's face crumpled and she began to cry. Roberto appeared behind her, his face grim and aged beyond his years. Sophia came running down the stairs, still in her pajamas, holding a piece of paper in her trembling hand. "David," Sophia said quietly, "you need to sit down." The next few minutes felt like a dream or maybe a nightmare. Sophia handed him Isabella's letter, and David read it twice before the words made any sense. Even then they felt impossible, like someone else's story that had nothing to do with his life. Isabella was gone. The woman he'd planned to marry in 7 hours had left town on a bus. leaving behind nothing but a letter full of apologies and explanations that didn't make the rejection hurt any less. David sank into the familiar kitchen chair where he'd shared Sunday dinners with this family for over a year, the same chair where he'd asked Roberto for permission to marry his daughter, the same chair where he'd planned out their future and talked about the grandchildren they hoped to give these wonderful people. Sophia knelt beside him, her hand gentle on his shoulder. "David, I'm so sorry. I should have known, should have done something." But David barely heard her. He was thinking about the church full of flowers, the guests who would arrive expecting a celebration, and the honeymoon tickets in his jacket pocket. He was thinking about the little house on Maple Street that he'd been renovating as a surprise for Isabella, painting the bedroom her favorite shade of blue and installing the clawfoot bathtub she'd admired in a magazine. Mostly, he was thinking about the woman he loved, alone on a bus to somewhere far away, running from a life that had included him. The sun was rising over Cedar Falls, illuminating what should have been the happiest day of David Rodriguez's life. Instead, it was shaping up to be the day his carefully planned future fell apart, leaving him to figure out how to put the pieces back together again. 200 guests were expecting a wedding. The bride was halfway to Oregon, and in 6 hours, someone was going to have to stand up in that decorated church and explain to a room full of people that sometimes love isn't enough, and sometimes the person you think you know best is the one who surprises you most. The Martinez family living room had never felt so small. David sat surrounded by chaos as phones rang constantly, and family members rushed in and out, trying to manage the disaster that Isabella's departure had created. Sophia moved through it all like a calm center in a hurricane, making lists, calling vendors, and somehow keeping everyone from falling completely apart. She had already contacted the florist to cancel the bouquets, called the photographer to explain the situation, and was working on a list of guests who needed to be personally called, since there wasn't time to reach everyone before the 2 o'clock ceremony. Her efficiency was impressive, but David could see the pain in her eyes every time she thought no one was looking. David's best man, Tony, had arrived an hour earlier and was helping to make phone calls. The hardest part was explaining to elderly relatives who didn't quite understand how a bride could simply disappear on her wedding day. Great-Aunt Maria kept insisting that Isabella must have been kidnapped, while Uncle Frank wanted to drive to the bus station and bring her back home. She made her choice, Sophia said firmly when Uncle Frank announced his plan for the 3rd time. We have to respect that even if we don't understand it. David hadn't said much since reading Isabella's letter. He sat in that same kitchen chair, turning his grandmother's engagement ring over and over in his hands. The ring that should have been on Isabella's finger in 5 hours. The ring that was supposed to symbolize promises and forever, and a love that could weather any storm. Carmen Martinez moved around the kitchen like a ghost, mechanically packing up the food she'd spent 3 days preparing for the reception. Every few minutes she would stop and press her hands to her face, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening to her family. All those people, she kept saying. What will we tell all those people? Roberto had retreated to his workshop in the garage where he was probably taking out his frustration on some innocent piece of wood. He wasn't good with emotional situations, but David knew he was hurting too. Roberto had welcomed David into the family like the son he'd never had, teaching him to fix things and sharing stories about his own young marriage. By noon, they had managed to contact most of the wedding guests. Some were angry, some were sympathetic, and a few seemed almost excited by the drama of it all. The church had been notified, though Father Miguel said he would keep the flowers up for a few days in case the family wanted to hold a prayer service or something positive to help heal the community. The reception hall was more complicated. The deposit couldn't be refunded, and the caterer had already prepared most of the food. Sophia suggested they could invite the immediate family to still gather for a meal, to support each other through this difficult time. I can't, David said suddenly, speaking for the first time in hours. I can't sit in that hall with the white tablecloths and the centerpieces and pretend this is some kind of family dinner. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at him. His voice was hoarse with emotion and his eyes were red-rimmed but determined. I need some air, he said, standing up abruptly. Sophia, will you come with me? Sophia nodded and followed him outside. They walked in silence to the small park across the street, where Isabella used to take her students for outdoor lessons when the weather was nice. David sat heavily on a bench under an old oak tree, and Sophia settled beside him. I keep thinking this is some kind of test, David said quietly. Like maybe Isabella's going to come back and say she was just scared, that she needed to know I would fight for her. Sophia's heart ached for him. David, I don't think she's coming back today. I know. He looked down at the engagement ring still clutched in his hand. The thing is, I'm not even angry at her. I should be furious, right? I should be calling her selfish and cruel, and all the things a man's supposed to say when his bride runs away. But I keep thinking about how unhappy she's been these past few months, and I realize I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to see it. They sat quietly for a few minutes watching cars drive by full of people going about their normal Saturday activities. People who weren't dealing with canceled weddings and broken hearts and the wreckage of carefully made plans. Sophia, can I ask you something? Of course. Did you ever think Isabella and I were wrong for each other? The question caught Sophia off guard. She had always been careful not to interfere in her sister's relationships. But if she was being completely honest, I thought you were both wonderful people who cared about each other very much, she said carefully. That's not what I asked. Sophia sighed. I thought maybe you loved the idea of each other more than you loved the reality of each other. You loved that she was kind and stable and would make a good wife. She loved that you were reliable and successful and would take care of her. But I never saw the kind of passion between you two that makes people willing to fight the whole world for each other. David nodded slowly. Isabella deserves that kind of love. The kind that makes someone crazy with joy just to be in the same room with her. So do you, Sophia said softly. They walked back toward the house, but David stopped suddenly in front of St. Catherine's Church. The building was decorated with white ribbons and flowers, ready for a ceremony that would never happen. The sight should have been devastating, but instead, David felt something unexpected. Clarity. Sophia, I need to ask you something. And I need you to really think about it before you answer. She turned to face him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. What if we don't cancel everything? What if we still have a wedding today? Sophia stared at him. David, Isabella is gone. There can't be a wedding without a bride. There could be a different bride. The words hung between them like something dangerous and impossible. Sophia felt her breath catch in her throat as she realized what he was suggesting. You and I have known each other for years, David continued, speaking quickly as if he needed to get all the words out before he lost his courage. We're friends. We respect each other. We make each other laugh. We work well together. Like we've been doing all morning, handling this crisis as a team. David, you can't be serious. I am serious. Dead serious. He stepped closer to her, his eyes intense and hopeful. Look at our families, Sophia. Look at how devastated everyone is. Your mother has been planning this wedding for months. Father Miguel prepared a beautiful ceremony. 200 people cleared their schedules to celebrate with us. But you don't love me, Sophia whispered. I care about you tremendously. I respect you and enjoy your company, and think you're one of the strongest, most compassionate people I've ever known. That's more than a lot of marriages start with. Sophia's mind was racing. What David was suggesting was crazy, impossible, completely outside anything she had ever imagined for her life. But as she looked at his earnest face and thought about her devastated family, she found herself actually considering it. What about Isabella? What happens when she comes back? If she comes back, we'll deal with that then. But Sophia, she made her choice. She chose to leave rather than marry me. That tells us both everything we need to know about how she really felt. Sophia thought about the promise Isabella had made her make the night before. Take care of David. Make sure he knows he's worthy of love. At the time, it had seemed like the worried words of a scared bride. Now it felt almost prophetic. This is insane, Sophia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Maybe, or maybe it's the sanest thing either of us could do. We could save our families from complete heartbreak. We could start with friendship and respect and see if something deeper grows from there. We could keep the promises we made to all those people who are expecting a celebration today. David dropped to one knee right there on the church steps, holding out his grandmother's ring. Sophia's heart stopped. Sophia Martinez, will you marry me today? Will you be my partner and my friend and help me figure out what love really means? Sophia looked down at this good man offering her an impossible choice. Behind him, she could see the church where her sister was supposed to get married in 3 hours. Around them, the flowers and ribbons created a beautiful backdrop for a proposal that no one could have imagined. She thought about David's kindness. about the way he had handled this morning's crisis with dignity and grace. She thought about their families, about 200 guests, about all the plans that could still be saved. Most of all, she thought about the secret she had never told anyone, that she had always admired David Rodriguez, had always thought Isabella was lucky to have found such a genuinely good man. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." As David slipped the ring onto her finger, Sophia realized that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to exactly where you're supposed to be. The news of David and Sophia's impromptu engagement spread through both families like wildfire. When they returned to the Martinez house hand in hand, with Isabella's engagement ring now on Sophia's finger, the reaction was a mixture of shock, confusion, and desperate hope. Carmen Martinez took one look at her younger daughter and burst into fresh tears. But this time, they weren't entirely tears of sadness. After the devastating morning they'd all endured, the possibility of salvaging something beautiful from the wreckage felt like a miracle. "Misha," she whispered, taking Sophia's face in her hands. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia looked at her mother, then at David standing quietly beside her and felt a surprising sense of peace. "I'm sure, Mama, this feels right." Roberto emerged from his workshop, still holding a hammer and covered in sawdust. When Tony explained what David and Sophia were planning, the older man studied his future son-in-law with new eyes. "You really want to marry my Sophia today?" Roberto asked directly. "Yes, sir, I do." "Not because you're hurt or angry or trying to prove something to Isabella?" David considered the question seriously. "No, sir. I'm asking Sophia to marry me because she's an incredible woman who deserves to be loved and cherished. Because we're good together in ways that matter. Because I think we could build something real and lasting if we give ourselves the chance." Roberto nodded slowly, then surprised everyone by pulling David into a fierce hug. "Then welcome to our family, son. Really welcome this time." The logistics of switching brides with 3 hours' notice should have been impossible. But Sophia had inherited her mother's organizational skills and her father's determination. She immediately began making calls to vendors, explaining the unusual situation and asking if they could accommodate the change. The florist was surprisingly understanding. "Honey," she said over the phone, "in 30 years of wedding planning, I've seen everything. Love finds a way. We'll make sure you have the most beautiful bouquet for 3 o'clock." The photographer agreed to stay, intrigued by the unique story unfolding. The musicians were happy to perform regardless of which Martinez daughter walked down the aisle. The biggest challenge was the dress. Isabella's wedding gown was beautiful, but it had been fitted specifically for her taller, slimmer frame. Sophia was shorter and more curved, making the elaborate dress completely unwearable. With only hours to spare, there was no time for alterations or finding a traditional wedding dress. "I have an idea," said Maria Santos, Sophia's best friend who had driven over as soon as she heard the news. "Remember that blue dress you wore to your nursing graduation? The one your grandmother always said made you look like an angel?" Sophia's face lit up. The dress was simple but elegant, a soft blue that brought out her eyes and fit her perfectly. It wasn't white, wasn't traditional, but it was hers in a way that Isabella's dress could never be. "Something blue," Carmen said with the first genuine smile she'd managed all day. The guest list had to be dramatically reduced. Most of the extended family and many friends had already been told the wedding was canceled, and there wasn't time to reach everyone again. But the immediate families were contacted, along with the closest friends who could make it on short notice. Father Miguel met with David and Sophia privately to discuss the ceremony. The elderly priest had known both families since they were children and had watched this drama unfold with compassion and wisdom. "This is unusual. I won't lie to you," he told them as they sat in his small office behind the altar. "But I've been performing marriages for 40 years, and I've learned that love comes in many forms. What matters is that you're entering this commitment with honest hearts and genuine care for each other." He asked them tough questions about their expectations, their understanding of marriage, and their readiness to build a life together. Both David and Sophia answered honestly, acknowledging that their relationship was built on friendship and mutual respect rather than passionate romance, but expressing hope that deeper love would grow from that solid foundation. "Some of the strongest marriages I've seen started exactly that way," Father Miguel assured them. "Passion burns hot but often burns out quickly. Respect and genuine affection make better soil for lasting love." By 2 o'clock, the church was ready for a very different ceremony than the one originally planned. Instead of 200 guests, 43 people filled the first few pews. The decorations were the same, but they somehow felt different, more intimate, more meaningful. Sophia stood in the small bridal room at the back of the church, looking at herself in the mirror. The blue dress was perfect, and Maria had managed to style her hair into an elegant updo adorned with small white flowers from the original bridal bouquet. She looked beautiful, but more importantly, she looked like herself. "You don't have to do this," Maria said quietly, helping to adjust Sophia's pearl necklace. "Everyone would understand if you changed your mind." "I know," Sophia replied, surprising herself with how calm she felt. "But I don't want to change my mind. This morning, I woke up thinking I was going to help my sister get married. Tonight I'm going to go to sleep as David's wife. It's not the story anyone expected, but it feels like the right story for us." Meanwhile, David stood at the altar with Tony beside him as his best man. The same altar where he was supposed to marry Isabella, but somehow the space felt completely different now. Less formal, more personal, filled with people who genuinely wanted to celebrate this unexpected union. When the music started and Sophia began her walk down the aisle, David felt his breath catch. She was radiant in her blue dress, carrying a simple bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. But what struck him most was her expression, calm, confident, and genuinely happy. As she reached him and took his hand, Sophia whispered, "No second thoughts?" "None," David whispered back and meant it completely. The ceremony itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Father Miguel spoke about love as a choice as much as a feeling, about the commitment to build something together, even when the foundation is different than expected. David and Sophia exchanged the same vows that had been written for his wedding to Isabella, but somehow they felt entirely new when spoken between them. When David placed the ring on Sophia's finger, the same ring that should have been Isabella's, it felt right in a way that surprised everyone present. The ring seemed to belong to Sophia, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The reception was held at Romano's restaurant, the same place where the rehearsal dinner had been celebrated the night before. But instead of the elaborate sit-down dinner originally planned, the family created an intimate gathering with home-cooked food and heartfelt toasts. Roberto stood up to speak, his voice thick with emotion. "Yesterday I thought I was losing a daughter. Today I realize I was gaining the son I always hoped for, David. You've shown more character in one day than most men show in a lifetime. And Sophia Mia, you've reminded us all that love comes in many forms, and sometimes the most beautiful gifts are the ones we never expected." Carmen presented Sophia with her own mother's wedding bracelet, a family heirloom that had been saved for this day. "Every Martinez bride wears this on her wedding day," she said, fastening it around Sophia's wrist. "It looks perfect on you." As the evening wound down, David and Sophia found themselves on the restaurant's patio where Isabella had sat just 24 hours earlier, confiding her doubts to her sister. Now Sophia sat there as a new bride, her hand in her husband's, both of them amazed by how much their lives had changed in a single day. "Are you okay?" David asked softly. "Really okay?" Sophia considered the question. She thought about Isabella, probably arriving in Portland right now, starting whatever journey she needed to take. She thought about the life she'd been living yesterday as the helpful sister, the dedicated nurse, the woman who took care of everyone else's needs before her own. Now she was Mrs. David Rodriguez, married to a good man who saw her worth and chose her when he could have chosen anger or bitterness instead. "I'm more than okay," she said, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the stars come out over Cedar Falls. "I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, or how their unusual marriage would develop over time, but as they sat together in the quiet night, both felt hopeful that they had made the right choice, not just for their families or their community, but for themselves and the unexpected love story they were just beginning to write. The first morning of their marriage, Sophia woke up in the guest bedroom of David's apartment, momentarily confused about where she was. Sunlight streamed through unfamiliar curtains, and she could hear the sound of coffee brewing and someone moving quietly around the kitchen. Then she remembered she was married now, to a man she'd known for years but never truly imagined as her husband. David had been incredibly thoughtful the night before, showing her to the spare room and assuring her there was no pressure to share his bedroom until they both felt ready. He'd already cleared space in the closet and dresser for her things, and had stocked the bathroom with toiletries in case she'd forgotten anything in the rush of the wedding day. When she emerged from the guest room, David was standing at the kitchen counter in jeans and a t-shirt, looking surprisingly domestic as he prepared breakfast. He turned and smiled when he saw her, but she could see a hint of nervousness in his eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Rodriguez," he said softly, testing out how the name sounded. Sophia felt a flutter in her stomach at hearing her new name. "Good morning, husband." They both laughed a little awkwardly, and then David offered her coffee in a mug that read "World's Best Sister," a gift Sophia had given Isabella the previous Christmas. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "We should probably talk about how we want this to work," David said as they sat at his small kitchen table. "I mean the practical stuff. Finances, household responsibilities, expectations." Sophia appreciated his straightforward approach. "I think we should keep our own bank accounts for now, maybe open a joint one for shared expenses. I'll keep working at the hospital and you have your business. We'll figure out the rest as we go." "What about—" David paused, clearly trying to find the right words. "What about the physical side of marriage? I don't want you to feel pressured, but I also don't want you to feel like we're just roommates." Sophia felt her cheeks warm, but she met his eyes directly. "I think we should let that develop naturally, when it feels right for both of us." Those first few weeks were a careful dance of learning to live together. David was neater than Sophia had expected, always washing his dishes immediately after eating and making his bed with military precision every morning. Sophia discovered that he sang in the shower, always the same 3 songs, and that he read mystery novels late into the night when he couldn't sleep. Sophia's routines slowly blended with his. She was used to long shifts at the hospital, sometimes coming home exhausted and needing quiet time to decompress. David learned to recognize these moods and would have dinner waiting or run a bath for her without being asked. In return, Sophia brought warmth and laughter into David's previously orderly but somewhat lonely apartment. The biggest adjustment was dealing with other people's reactions. At work, Sophia's colleagues were fascinated by the story of the substitute bride. Most were supportive, though a few seemed to think she'd somehow stolen her sister's life. Sophia learned to ignore the whispers and focus on the genuine friends who celebrated her unexpected happiness. David's construction crews took the news with typical male stoicism, though his foreman Tony Jr. made jokes about marrying the whole family until David told him to knock it off. The clients who had heard about the wedding drama were surprisingly positive, with several telling David they admired him for not letting the situation defeat him. Their families watched the new marriage with a mixture of hope and concern. Carmen Martinez worried that Sophia was sacrificing her own dreams to fix Isabella's mistake, while Roberto seemed relieved that David was officially part of their family, regardless of which daughter had made it happen. David's mother, Maria Rodriguez, had always liked Sophia, and was thrilled to finally have a daughter-in-law who enjoyed cooking and didn't mind her tendency to offer unsolicited advice about everything from housekeeping to career choices. The first real test of their partnership came about 6 weeks into their marriage, when David's biggest client suddenly canceled a major project, threatening the financial stability of his business. Sophia found him at the kitchen table one evening, surrounded by paperwork and looking defeated. "How bad is it?" she asked, sitting down beside him. "Bad enough that I might have to lay off 3 guys and take a second mortgage on the business property." Sophia studied the numbers, her nursing background having taught her to think analytically about problems. "What if we use some of my savings to cover payroll for a couple months while you find new clients?" David looked up in surprise. "Sophia, I can't ask you to risk your money on my business problems." "You're not asking. I'm offering. We're partners now, remember? Your problems are my problems." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. David realized that Sophia wasn't just along for the ride in this marriage. She was genuinely invested in building a life together. And Sophia discovered that supporting David felt natural and right in a way that surprised her. They weathered the business crisis together, with Sophia helping with bookkeeping in the evenings, while David worked extra hours to secure new contracts. By Christmas, the company was back on solid ground, and David had hired back all the workers he'd been afraid of losing. Physical intimacy developed slowly and naturally between them. It started with casual touches, Sophia's hand on David's shoulder when she passed behind his chair, David's arm around Sophia when they watched movies on the couch. The first kiss happened 3 months into their marriage on New Year's Eve, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Sophia moved into David's bedroom gradually, first sleeping there on nights when storms made her nervous, then staying more and more often until the guest room became her office instead of her bedroom. They learned each other's bodies and preferences with patience and tenderness, building intimacy based on trust and growing affection rather than desperate passion. By spring, they had developed comfortable routines that felt genuinely married rather than like an extended sleepover. David would bring Sophia coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, and she would pack lunches for both of them during her days off. They grocery shopped together, argued about paint colors for the living room, and attended family gatherings as a united front. The house on Maple Street that David had been renovating for Isabella became their shared project. Sophia had different tastes than her sister. She preferred warm colors to Isabella's cool pastels, and she wanted a garden where Isabella had planned a pristine lawn. David found himself enjoying Sophia's input more than he'd enjoyed making decisions alone. I never realized how much I wanted someone to care about whether the bathroom tile was cream or beige, he told Tony one day as they installed Sophia's chosen fixtures. That's because you've got a real partner now, Tony replied. Someone who's actually building a life with you instead of just living in the one you built for them. The comment stayed with David because it felt true. His relationship with Isabella had been built on his plans, his timeline, his vision of what their life should look like. With Sophia, everything was negotiated and shared. She challenged his ideas, contributed her own, and somehow made every decision feel like it belonged to both of them. 6 months after their unexpected wedding, David and Sophia were hosting Sunday dinner for both families when Carmen made an observation that surprised everyone. "You know," she said, watching David and Sophia move around the kitchen together, finishing each other's sentences and anticipating each other's needs. "I don't think I ever saw Isabella and David work together like this." Roberto nodded thoughtfully. "These two fit together like pieces of the same puzzle." David's mother Maria raised her glass of wine. "Sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places." As Sophia felt David's hand find hers under the table, she realized that Maria was absolutely right. She had never planned to marry her sister's fiancé, never imagined building a life with someone she'd known primarily as her sister's boyfriend. But somehow this unexpected marriage had become the most natural thing in her world. They still didn't know if Isabella would ever return to Cedar Falls, or how they would handle that reunion if it happened. But Sophia was beginning to understand that their marriage wasn't about Isabella anymore. It was about the life she and David were creating together, one day at a time, building something real and lasting from the most unlikely beginning. 15 months after running away from her own wedding, Isabella Martinez stood on the front porch of the house on Maple Street, her heart pounding as she stared at the home that should have been hers. The blue paint on the shutters was new, and there were flower boxes under the windows that she had never planned. A wooden swing hung from the porch ceiling, and wind chimes played a gentle melody in the evening breeze. The house looked like a home in a way it never had in her imagination. Isabella had spent those 15 months discovering herself in Portland, working at a small art gallery and attending therapy sessions that helped her understand why she had felt so trapped in her old life. She had learned to paint again, not the careful watercolors she'd done for her students, but bold, expressive pieces that came from somewhere deep in her soul. She'd traveled to small coastal towns, hiked mountain trails, and slowly figured out who she was when she wasn't trying to be who everyone expected her to be. The woman who stood on David's porch was different from the one who had fled Cedar Falls. She was leaner from hiking, more confident from living independently, and more at peace with herself than she'd ever been. Her hair was shorter, sun-streaked from outdoor adventures, and her clothes were more casual and artistic than the conservative outfits she'd worn as a teacher. But as she raised her hand to knock on the door, Isabella realized she had made a crucial assumption about what she would find when she came home. She had expected to find David alone, probably still hurt but perhaps ready to listen to her apologies and explanations. She had imagined herself explaining how much she had learned about herself, how she finally understood what had gone wrong between them, and maybe even exploring whether they could start over as different people. She had not expected the door to be answered by Sophia, wearing a simple sundress and an apron, looking like she belonged in this house more than Isabella ever had. "Isabella?" Sophia's voice was shocked, her face pale as she stared at her sister. "What are you doing here?" "I came home," Isabella said simply, though the word home felt strange in her mouth as she looked at Sophia standing in David's doorway. "I came to see David. I need to explain things to him, to apologize properly." Sophia's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, worry, and something that might have been protectiveness. "Isabella, you should have called. You should have let us know you were coming." "Why? Is David not here?" Before Sophia could answer, David's voice came from inside the house. "Sophia, who's at the door?" Isabella watched her sister's face as David appeared behind her, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, looking comfortable and domestic. His arm came around Sophia's waist in a gesture so natural and protective that Isabella felt her world tilt sideways. "Hello, Isabella," David said quietly. His voice was calm, but she could see the shock in his eyes. "This is unexpected." Isabella stared at them standing together in the doorway, and suddenly everything became clear. The way Sophia fit under David's arm, the matching wedding rings on their fingers, the fact that Sophia was wearing an apron in David's kitchen as if she had every right to be there. "You married each other," Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Sophia replied, lifting her chin with a dignity that Isabella remembered from their childhood. "We did." Isabella felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. She had prepared for many possible scenarios during her long journey home: David's anger, his coldness, even his indifference. But she had never imagined this, never imagined that her sister and her ex-fiancé would build a life together in her absence. "When?" she managed to ask. "The day you left," David said simply. 3 hours after you were supposed to marry me, I married Sophia instead." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. While she was on a bus to Portland, thinking about finding herself and discovering what she really wanted from life, David and Sophia were exchanging vows in the church where Isabella was supposed to get married. "How could you?" Isabella turned to Sophia, her voice rising with hurt and betrayal. "How could you do this to me?" Sophia stepped forward, no longer the quiet younger sister who had always deferred to Isabella's wishes. "Do what to you, Isabella? Marry a man you abandoned? Take care of someone you left brokenhearted? Build a life with someone you decided you didn't want? He was mine first." "No," David said firmly, speaking for the first time with real emotion in his voice. "I was never yours, Isabella. You made that very clear when you walked away." Isabella looked between them, seeing how they stood together, united in a way she and David had never been. Even in her anger and hurt, she couldn't deny that they looked right together. They looked like they belonged in each other's lives. "I came back to make things right," Isabella said desperately. "I learned so much about myself. I understand now why I felt so trapped, why I couldn't go through with the wedding. I thought maybe we could start over, do things differently." David's expression softened with something that might have been pity. "Isabella, I'm glad you found yourself. I'm glad you figured out what you needed. But you can't come back after 15 months and expect everything to be waiting for you exactly as you left it." "But you loved me." "I did love you," David agreed. "Or I loved who I thought you were. But Isabella, even before you left, we both knew something wasn't right between us. You were miserable for months before the wedding. You saved us both from a marriage that would have made us both unhappy." Sophia watched her sister process this information, seeing the pain and confusion in Isabella's eyes. Despite everything, Sophia felt a stab of sympathy for the woman who had once been her closest confidant. "Bella," Sophia said gently, using the childhood nickname, "I know this is a shock. I know it's not what you expected to find when you came home. But David and I, we're happy together. We're building something real and good." Isabella looked around the porch, taking in the details that made this house a home. The swing where David and Sophia probably sat in the evenings talking about their days. The flower boxes that Sophia had clearly planted and tended. The wind chimes that sounded like music instead of the silence Isabella remembered from her brief engagement. "Did you love him before?" Isabella asked suddenly. "When he was with me, were you secretly in love with him?" Sophia considered lying, softening the truth to protect Isabella's feelings. But they were past the point where gentle lies would help anyone. "I admired him," Sophia said honestly. I thought you were lucky to have found such a good man. But Isabella, I never would have acted on those feelings. I never would have interfered in your relationship. I married him because you left and he asked me to help save our families from complete devastation. What grew between us happened after we were married, not before. Isabella felt tears starting to fall, mourning not just the relationship she'd lost, but the future she'd imagined she could reclaim. I thought I could come home and fix everything. I thought if I explained, if I showed how much I'd changed. Some things can't be fixed, David said gently. Some changes can't be undone. Isabella, I hope you found what you were looking for in Portland. I hope you're happy now. But this is my life now with Sophia. This is where I belong. Isabella looked at them one more time, seeing the love and commitment in their faces, the way they protected each other without even thinking about it. She realized that even if David and Sophia hadn't gotten married, even if David had waited for her to come back, things could never have been the same between them. Too much had changed. Too much trust had been broken. I should go, Isabella said finally. I need to think about all this. Where will you stay? Sophia asked, her natural caretaking instincts kicking in despite the tension between them. I'll find a hotel. I need some time to process all this before I see Mom and Dad. David stepped forward slightly. Isabella, for what it's worth, I hope you can be happy for us eventually. Sophia deserves to have her sister back in her life, and you deserve to have your family. But it's going to take time for everyone to adjust to how things are now. Isabella nodded, unable to trust her voice. She turned to leave, then looked back at Sophia one more time. Are you happy? She asked. Really happy? Sophia's answer was immediate and certain. Yes, I'm happier than I've ever been. As Isabella walked away from the house that should have been hers, she realized that Sophia's happiness was both the thing that hurt most and the thing that made it impossible to fight what they had built together. Whatever mistakes Isabella had made, whatever pain she had caused, Sophia had found real love in the aftermath of Isabella's choices. And despite the hurt and shock and jealousy coursing through her, Isabella found that she couldn't bring herself to wish that love away from the sister who had always been there for her. Even when Isabella couldn't be there for herself, the confrontation was over. But the real work of healing and forgiveness was just beginning for all three of them. 2 years had passed since Isabella's unexpected return to Cedar Falls, and the Martinez family had slowly learned to navigate their new reality. Isabella had stayed in town for 3 months after that painful confrontation on David and Sophia's porch, working through her complicated feelings with a local therapist and gradually rebuilding relationships with her parents and extended family. The healing process hadn't been easy. There were awkward family dinners where everyone tried too hard to act normal, tense conversations about holidays and celebrations, and moments when old hurts surfaced unexpectedly. But slowly, with patience and genuine effort from everyone involved, they had found a new balance. Isabella had eventually returned to Portland, but this time with her family's blessing and support. She opened a small art studio, teaching painting classes to children and adults while working on her own expressive pieces. Her paintings had evolved during her time of self-discovery, becoming bolder and more authentic, reflecting the woman she had become rather than the one she thought she should be. David and Sophia's marriage had only grown stronger during this challenging period. Facing Isabella's return together had tested their partnership and proven that what they had built was solid enough to withstand unexpected storms. They had learned to communicate about difficult emotions, to support each other through uncertainty, and to trust in the foundation they had created together. The house on Maple Street had become a true home, filled with Sophia's laughter and David's quiet contentment. Sophia had left her job at the hospital to start her own home health care service, using her nursing skills to help elderly residents of Cedar Falls age comfortably in their own homes. David's construction business had grown to include a second crew, and he had begun specializing in accessible home modifications, often working with Sophia's clients to create safer living spaces. Their professional collaboration had become another source of connection between them. They would spend evenings planning projects together, with Sophia's medical knowledge complementing David's construction expertise. Watching them work together, their families had come to understand that this partnership was built on mutual respect and shared values in ways that Isabella and David's relationship had never been. The phone call that changed everything. came on a Tuesday evening in October, as David and Sophia were finishing dinner and discussing plans for their kitchen renovation. Isabella's voice on the phone was excited and nervous, carrying news that would force all of them to confront the growth and changes of the past 2 years. "Sophia, I need to tell you something important," Isabella said, her words rushing together in the way they had when they were children sharing secrets. "I'm getting married." Sophia felt her breath catch and she reached for David's hand across the table. "Married? Isabella, that's wonderful. Tell me everything." "His name is Marcus Chen. He's a photographer I met at the gallery. Sophia, he's amazing. He sees the world the way I do, and he makes me want to be the best version of myself. We've been dating for 8 months and he proposed last weekend." As Isabella described her fiancé and their plans for a small wedding ceremony in Portland, Sophia felt a complex mix of emotions. Joy for her sister's happiness, relief that Isabella had found someone who truly suited her, and a strange sense of closure about the path that had led them all to this point. "I want you both to come to the wedding," Isabella continued. "You and David. I know it might be strange, but Sophia, you're my sister. I want you there for the most important day of my life." After they hung up, Sophia and David sat quietly in their kitchen, processing the news. Isabella's engagement felt like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place, confirmation that everyone had ended up where they truly belonged. "Are you okay?" David asked, studying Sophia's face with the attention that had become second nature after 3 years of marriage. "I'm more than okay," Sophia replied, and realized she meant it completely. "I'm happy for her. She sounds genuinely excited in a way she never did when she was planning to marry you." David nodded thoughtfully. "We should go to the wedding. It feels important somehow, like it would officially close the chapter on all the confusion and hurt, and open a new one where we're all just family again." The wedding invitation arrived 2 weeks later, along with a personal note from Isabella. "Sophia and David, I know our story hasn't been traditional, and I know I caused both of you pain with my choices 3 years ago, but watching you two build something beautiful together has taught me what real love looks like. It's not the desperate, uncertain feeling I had before my almost wedding. It's the quiet confidence and partnership I see between you two. Marcus makes me feel the way I see David make you feel, Sophia. Safe and challenged and completely myself all at the same time. I finally understand why you both looked so right together, even in those first confusing days after I left. Thank you for showing me that love can grow from friendship, that the best marriages are built on respect and shared dreams, and that sometimes the most unexpected path leads exactly where you're supposed to be. I love you both, Isabella." As Sophia read the letter aloud, both she and David felt the last traces of guilt and uncertainty about their relationship finally dissolve. They had spent 3 years building something real and lasting, but part of them had always wondered if they were somehow living in Isabella's shadow, making the best of a situation that was ultimately second choice for everyone involved. Isabella's words released them from that doubt. They weren't consolation prizes for each other, weren't settling for comfortable companionship instead of true love. They were partners who had found each other through unusual circumstances and created something uniquely their own. The trip to Portland for Isabella's wedding became a celebration of more than just Isabella's new marriage. It was a celebration of how far they had all traveled from that devastating morning. 3 years earlier, when Isabella fled her wedding and turned everyone's world upside down. The ceremony was held in a small garden overlooking the Columbia River, with Isabella radiant in a simple dress that reflected her artistic personality rather than anyone else's expectations. Marcus was clearly smitten with his bride, and even more clearly suited to her in ways that David had never been. They laughed at each other's jokes, finished each other's sentences, and looked at each other like they couldn't quite believe their good fortune in finding one another. During the reception, Isabella approached Sophia and David as they sat together watching the sunset over the river. "I have something for you," Isabella said, pulling a small wrapped package from her purse. "I've been carrying this around for months, waiting for the right moment." Inside the package was the pearl necklace that had belonged to their grandmother, the one Isabella had worn when she fled Cedar Falls 3 years earlier. "Abuela always said this necklace should go to the Martinez daughter, who found true love," Isabella explained. "I wore it when I ran away because I thought it might bring me luck in finding myself." But Sophia, it belongs to you. You're the one who found real, lasting love. You're the one who built the kind of marriage Abuela would have been proud of. Sophia felt tears start to fall as David fastened the necklace around her neck. The pearls felt warm against her skin, and she could almost feel her grandmother's blessing in their gentle weight. "There's something else," Isabella said, her voice softer now. "I need you both to know that I'm grateful for what happened 3 years ago. Running away from that wedding was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the best thing I ever did for all of us. You two found each other, I found myself, and now we've all found the happiness we were meant to have." As the evening wound down and the three of them sat together looking out over the river, Sophia reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 years ago, she had been the quiet younger sister, supporting everyone else's dreams while not quite sure what she wanted for her own life. Now she was married to a man who saw her as his equal partner, running her own successful business, and confident in ways she had never imagined possible. David had grown too, from a man who was trying to build a life according to other people's expectations, into someone who had learned to listen to his own heart and create something authentic with the woman who truly understood him. And Isabella had become the person she was always meant to be, independent, creative, and finally in love with someone who appreciated her exactly as she was rather than as who they hoped she might become. 6 months after Isabella's wedding, Sophia and David made an announcement that surprised no one in their families but filled everyone with joy. Sophia was pregnant, and as she and David shared the news at Sunday dinner with both families present, the room erupted in celebration. Carmen immediately began planning to convert David and Sophia's home office into a nursery, while Roberto started sketching plans for a playground in the backyard. David's mother started knitting baby blankets, and even Isabella, participating in the family celebration via video call from Portland, cried happy tears at the news. "This baby is going to be so loved," Isabella said through the computer screen, "and so lucky to have parents who chose each other completely, without any doubt or hesitation."